multiverse is a vast and indifferent machinery, grinding through realities with the cold precision of cosmic law. Realms are separated not by distance, but by dimensional frequency, each universe vibrating at its own unique signature, sealed from the others by barriers that have held for millennia. These barriers are not walls, they are agreements. Ancient, inviolable compacts written into the fabric of existence by beings so powerful that their names became religions. To cross between realms without sanction is not merely dangerous. It is a declaration of war against the order of all things. But no one told Goku that. He had been sparring with Vegeta in the hyperbolic time chamber, a pocket dimension outside normal space where a year passed for every day in the real world. It had started as training. It always started as training. But somewhere between Vegeta's final flash and Goku's Kamehameha wave colliding at full output, something had gone wrong. The dimensional fabric of the chamber, already stretched thin by decades of abuse from two of the most powerful beings in any universe, had simply given way. Not explosively, not dramatically. It tore the way old cloth tears, quietly, inevitably, along a line of stress that had been building for years. Goku remembered the sensation of falling sideways through colors that had no names. He remembered Vegeta's furious shout cutting off mid-syllable, and then he remembered nothing, until the stone floor of the Outworld Coliseum rushed up to meet him. He hit the ground at the center of a fighting arena and rolled to his feet in one fluid motion, his combat instincts activating before his mind had fully processed where he was. The Coliseum of Outworld stretched around him in every direction. A massive circular structure carved from black volcanic rock, its tiered stands packed with thousands of spectators. But these were no ordinary crowd. Outworld's populace was a testament to the universe's brutal diversity. Tarkatans with bone blades jutting from their forearms snarled from the upper rings. Shao Kahn warriors, four-armed giants standing 8 feet tall, occupied reinforced sections of seating. Centaurians, reptilians, Terrans, and creatures Goku had no name for filled every available space, their combined noise a wall of sound that hit like a physical force. The arena floor was stained. Goku noticed that immediately. The dark stone had been cleaned many times, but never fully. Layers of old violence soaked into the rock itself, telling a history that no amount of scrubbing could erase. The crowd had gone momentarily silent at his arrival. Then the noise returned, doubled, a roar of confusion and excitement that shook dust from the ancient rafters. Goku straightened up, one hand instinctively going to his GI, and looked around with wide, curious eyes. His ki was present. He could feel it humming in his core, a steady and familiar. But something about the ambient energy of this place felt wrong in a way he couldn't immediately articulate. Like hearing a familiar song played in the wrong key. His power was there. But the world around him was saturated with a different kind of energy entirely, dense and ancient, and threaded through with something dark that pressed against his senses like cold smoke. "Huh," Goku said. Across the arena, I'm seated on a throne of bone and black iron at the Coliseum's highest point. Shao Kahn leaned forward. The Emperor of Outworld was a figure of absolute physical authority. Massive beyond human proportion, encased in armor that had been forged in Outworld's deepest furnaces, his skull-faced helmet casting his eyes in permanent shadow. He had ruled for 10,000 years through a combination of overwhelming strength, strategic brutality, and an almost supernatural instinct for identifying power. And in all those millennia, very few things had genuinely surprised him. The orange-clad stranger who had fallen from a dimensional rift in the middle of his tournament's opening ceremony and landed in a combat crouch, looking more curious than frightened, was one of them. Shao Kahn studied the newcomer with the patient attention of a predator cataloging an unknown animal. The stranger's physical build was unimpressive by Outworld standards. Human-sized, lean, dressed in a fighting gi that belonged to no realm Shao Kahn recognized. But the energy radiating off him was another matter entirely. It wasn't magic. It wasn't soul energy. It wasn't the divine fire of a titan or the dark current of Netherrealm corruption. It was something clean and enormous and utterly alien to this universe. A power so dense and so pure that even across the length of the coliseum, Shao Kahn could feel it pressing against the air like a second atmosphere. He turned to the figure standing at his right. Shang Tsung, sorcerer of 1,000 stolen souls, his ageless face arranged in an expression of careful neutrality that Shao Kahn knew concealed intense calculation. "What is he?" Shao Kahn asked. Shang Tsung's eyes hadn't left the stranger since the moment of his arrival. "Nothing from any realm I know," he said quietly. "But that energy..." He paused, visibly restraining his excitement. "That is not magic. That is not soul force. That is something I've never encountered in 10 lifetimes of study." On the arena floor, Goku had stopped rotating and fixed his gaze on the massive, armored figure on the throne. His read on energy was instinctive and precise, a combat sense refined across thousands of battles. Shao Kahn was strong, genuinely strong, in a way that sent a small, delighted spark through Goku's chest. The robed figure beside him registered differently. Less raw power, but threaded with something complex and layered that Goku's instincts flagged as dangerous in a way pure strength never was. He scratched the back of his head. Sorry about the entrance," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the arena. "I don't really know where I am. Is there someone I can talk to about getting back home?" The silence that followed was absolute. Then Shao Kahn began to laugh, a sound like boulders colliding, and the coliseum erupted around it. If you want to see more crossover battles and unexpected universe collisions, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and universe you'd want to see in the comments below. Let's explore the infinite together. The laughter died as quickly as it had come. Shao Kahn raised one gauntleted hand, and the crowd fell silent with the trained obedience of a population that had learned what happened to those who ignored his signals. He rose from his throne. A slow, deliberate unfolding of enormous mass, and his voice rolled across the coliseum like controlled thunder. "You have entered Outworld during the sacred tournament of Mortal Kombat," Shao Kahn announced, each word landing with the weight of absolute authority. "There is only one way to leave this arena." He paused. "Win." Goku blinked. Then a slow smile spread across his face, the particular smile that Vegeta had long ago learned to dread, and the one that meant Goku had just realized he was somewhere genuinely interesting. "A tournament?" he said. "Okay, I can do a tournament." The first opponent they sent against him was meant to be a message. Baraka emerged from the fighter's tunnel on the eastern side of the Coliseum, with the unhurried confidence of a creature that had never lost a fight it wanted to win. The Tarkatan general was a nightmare rendered in flesh and bone. His body a roadmap of old violence, his face split in the permanent rictus grin of his species. And from each forearm, twin bone blades had erupted to their full extension, each one longer than a short sword and honed to an edge that could split stone. He had served Shao Kahn for decades. He had eaten the hearts of champions. He had walked through fire and thunder god lightning and the bladed storms of Outworld's deepest wastelands and emerged from all of it with nothing more than new scars to add to his collection. He looked at Goku, the way a wolf looks at something small that has wandered too far from the herd. Goku looked back at him with frank, uncomplicated interest. The bone blades were remarkable. He'd never seen anything quite like them, not weapons, not exactly, but not purely biological either. They existed in that unsettling territory between, and the faint dark energy threaded through them resonated with the same Ronki frequency Goku had been sensing since his arrival. The coliseum's ambient power pressed against his Kai like a slow tide, not strong enough to disrupt it, but persistent enough to register as a constant background sensation. He filed that away. Baraka crossed the arena in a charge that covered 40 feet in under 2 seconds. Fast by any standard, his blades angled for a crossing slash that would have bisected a normal human at the waist and the throat simultaneously. It was the opening he used against every new opponent. Clean, efficient, immediately lethal. It told him everything he needed to know about what he was facing. Goku sidestepped. Not with ki-enhanced speed, not with any visible power output at all. He simply read the trajectory, adjusted his feet, and let Baraka's momentum carry those devastating blades through empty air 6 inches from his ribs. The displacement wind from the blades was genuine. They moved fast enough that Goku felt it as a clean slice of pressure against his GI. And he noted that with the same careful attention, he gave everything in a new fight. Baraka landed, spun with surprising grace for his size, and came back immediately. No pause, no reassessment, the pure attack instinct of a predator that had never needed to reassess. The second combination was faster and more complex, these blades working in overlapping arcs that created a cage of cutting edges around a central line of attack. Against any human fighter, against most of Outworld's warriors, it was an inescapable pattern. Goku moved through it like water through a broken dam, not forcefully, not with any apparent effort, ducking under one blade, leaning back from another, rotating his shoulders to let the third pass so close it shaved a thread from his G's collar. He was reading Baraka's muscle signals, the micro-tensions that preceded each motion, the weight distribution that telegraphed direction. A lifetime of fighting beings who could crack planets had calibrated his perception to a resolution that made Baraka's speed feel like a conversation rather than a combat emergency. He caught Baraka's right wrist on the fourth strike. Not the blade, the wrist, just above it. Fingers closing with precise and careful force. Enough to stop. Not enough to break. Though breaking would have required no additional effort whatsoever. Goku held the Tarkatan general's arm extended, their faces 18 inches apart, and felt the furious power in Baraka's frame straining against a grip that simply would not move. "You're really fast," Goku said with complete sincerity. "And those blades, do they hurt, growing like that?" Baraka stared at him, and then he activated his second blade on the trapped arm. A secondary extension mechanism that erupted the bone outward at a new angle, designed to catch opponents who had grabbed the first. It was a trap built into his biology, sprung on dozens of overconfident enemies. Goku released the wrist and stepped back, letting the blade pass, and the crowd made a sound. Not the roar of bloodlust, but something more uncertain. A collective intake of breath from thousands of beings who were trying to recategorize what they were watching. Goku had not been in danger. And somehow, impossibly, that was the most frightening thing they had seen all day. Up in the Imperial box, our Shang Tsung watched with his hands folded and his ancient eyes moving between the fighter in orange and the energy readings he was conducting through subtle, arcane means. A passive soul sense he'd refined over centuries that could detect the metaphysical weight of any living being. What it was telling him about the stranger was causing a very controlled, very private crisis behind his composed expression. Soul weight was the fundamental currency of Shang Tsung's power. Every living being had it. The accumulated spiritual mass of their existence, their experiences, their vital force. A strong warrior might register as the equivalent of 100 ordinary souls. A champion of Mortal Kombat, several hundred. Shao Kahn himself registered in the thousands, an emperor's worth of accumulated dominance and stolen power. The stranger in the arena registered as something Shang Tsung had no scale for. It wasn't just the quantity, though the quantity was staggering. A key reserve so vast, it pressed against his soul sense like an ocean pressing against a measuring cup. It was the quality. The energy was clean in a way that dark magic fundamentally was not. It was life force distilled to its purest expression, untouched by corruption, unweighted by cruelty, burning with the particular brightness of a being who had died and returned and fought and grown across a lifetime of genuine battles against genuine monsters. It was. Shang Tsung realized with the slow dawning of true greed, the single most valuable spiritual resource he had ever encountered in 10 lifetimes. He wanted it with an intensity that he carefully kept entirely off his face. On the arena floor, Baraka had abandoned his opening combinations and was now fighting with genuine ferocity. His full combat intelligence engaged, his blade patterns shifting to the complex sequences he reserved for opponents who had earned his actual attention. He was magnificent in his violence, a masterwork of biological weapon and combat experience. And Goku was fighting him back now, actually engaging rather than simply evading, trading measured strikes that rang against bone blades with a sound like a hammer hitting an anvil. Goku was using his body. No ki blasts, no power aura. Just the foundational physical capability of a Saiyan who had trained under 100 times Earth's gravity, died twice, and unsparred regularly with beings who could destroy solar systems. His punches rocked Baraka backward across the stone floor, each impact sending fracture lines racing through the arena surface. His defense was a flowing, adaptive thing. Not rigid blocking, but constant repositioning, making Baraka's blades work for every inch. The crowd had forgotten to make noise. They were watching with the focused silence of experts, witnessing something that was rewriting their understanding of what was possible. Baraka took a direct hit to the chest, Goku's fist moving at perhaps 15% of his actual capability, a deliberately restrained strike, and traveled 30 feet through the air before hitting the arena wall hard enough to crack it. He dropped to one knee, blade still extended, chest heaving, eyes burning with a furious pride that would not let him stay down. He rose. Goku watched him rise and felt something uncomplicated and genuine move through him. Respect. "You're tough," he said. There was no condescension in it. It was the honest assessment of a fighter for another fighter. Baraka snarled and charged again. From the Imperial box, Shao Kahn watched his general fight with the expression of a man doing rapid calculations. The stranger was not fighting at his limit. He was not even approaching it. The power signature radiating off that lean, orange-clad frame had not spiked even slightly during the entire exchange. Whatever this being was capable of, what Shao Kahn was watching was a fraction of it. A polite fraction, extended as a kind of professional courtesy to an opponent who hadn't earned the real thing yet. Shao Kahn had conquered 10 realms. He had broken champions, shattered gods, outlasted elder god sanctions through sheer imperial will. His instinct for power was the most refined instrument in Outworld. It was telling him, with absolute clarity, that he was looking at something that could be the greatest weapon in the history of realm conquest, or the greatest threat. Possibly both. He turned to Shang Tsung. "Find out everything," he said quietly. "Everything." Shang Tsung smiled the smile of a man who had already started. The fight with Baraka ended without a fatality. That, in itself, was an event. Goku had finished it cleanly, a precise strike to the solar plexus that carried enough force to put Baraka through the arena floor up to his shoulders, the stone cracking around him in a perfect circle like a portrait frame around something terrible. The Tarkatan general was alive, conscious and furious, but structurally unable to continue. Goku had stood over him for a moment, offered his hand, and then when Baraka had stared at it with undisguised bewilderment, had simply nodded and stepped back. The crowd didn't know how to respond to that. Outworld's tournament culture had one language, and it was written in finality. A downed opponent was a dead opponent. That was not cruelty. It was law, the natural grammar of a universe where mercy was a tactical error, and compassion was a wound you left in yourself for enemies to exploit. The stranger had violated that grammar so completely that the coliseum had gone briefly, genuinely silent, before erupting into something that wasn't quite cheering and wasn't quite protest. A raw, confused noise that had no established category. Shao Kahn did not signal for Baraka's execution. That too was an event. But the Emperor's attention was entirely elsewhere, fixed on the figure standing in the center of the arena with his hands in his pockets, looking up at the crowd with the open curiosity of someone who had wandered into an interesting festival. The second and third fighters came quickly, the tournament's handlers apparently deciding that speed was preferable to ceremony under the circumstances. Erron Black descended from the western tunnel with the unhurried economy of a man who had been killing people professionally for a very long time. The gunslinger moved like an equation, every step precise, both revolvers already in hand before he'd cleared the tunnel mouth. He fired 6 rounds before he'd taken 4 steps into the arena. Not a dramatic opening salvo, but a probing pattern. 6 different trajectories designed to map an opponent's evasion instincts and create predictive data for the shots that followed. All 6 rounds stopped. Not blocked, not dodged. Stopped, caught against the faint shimmer of ki that Goku had let rise instinctively around his skin, a reflex as automatic as breathing. The bullets hung in the air for a half second like frozen punctuation, and then dropped to the stone floor with 6 small, separate sounds. Erron Black stopped walking. He looked at the bullets on the ground. He looked at Goku. Something shifted in his expression. Not fear, because fear required the imagination of outcomes he couldn't produce. And Erron Black's imagination had always been ruthlessly practical. What shifted was his threat assessment. A complete and instantaneous revision that moved the orange-clad stranger from the category of unknown quantity into the category of things that required a fundamentally different approach. He holstered 1 revolver and drew a long-barreled rifle from his back in the same motion, already calculating angles. Goku crossed the arena in the time it took Erron Black to raise the rifle. The gunslinger found himself gently but immovably restrained. Goku behind him, both his arms pinned at his sides with a casual but absolute grip. The rifle pointed harmlessly at the sky. He struggled once, the automatic resistance of a lifetime fighter, and felt with perfect clarity that he was being held by something that could have chosen to make this moment considerably more permanent and had declined to. "I'm not trying to fight you," Goku said, not unkindly. "I'm trying to figure out where I am." Erron Black processed this for a moment. "You're in Outworld," he said, his voice carrying the flat drawl of a man from a different era entirely. "And you just made a very complicated situation considerably more complicated." "Yeah," Goku agreed. "That seems to happen a lot." He released Erron Black and stepped back. The gunslinger turned. studied him for a long moment with eyes that had cataloged thousands of dangerous people and knew exactly what they were looking at. Then holstered his remaining revolver with a slow and deliberate movement that was as close to a white flag as his nature permitted. The third fighter didn't come. Instead, lightning did. It fell from a sky that had been cloudless a moment before. A single bolt of white-blue electrical force that hit the arena floor 15 feet from Goku and left behind, in its crackling aftermath, a figure in white and blue robes. The newcomer straightened slowly, his face weathered and grave beneath a broad-brimmed hat, his eyes carrying the particular exhausted weight of a man who had been responsible for the fate of a world for longer than most people lived. Raiden, protector of Earthrealm and Thunder God, regarded Goku with an expression that was equal parts relief, alarm, and the kind of careful assessment that came from millennia of dealing with powers that didn't belong where they'd arrived. "You are not from this universe," Raiden said. It was not a question. "No," Goku said. "I'm from..." He paused, realizing that Earth in his universe and Earthrealm here were probably not the same thing, and that explaining the Dragon Ball cosmology to a Thunder God in the middle of an enemy emperor's tournament was going to require more time than the current situation seemed to allow. "It's complicated." "I am familiar with complicated," Raiden said. He stepped closer, and Goku felt the Thunder God reaching out with divine senses, reading him the way Goku read power levels, but with a different instrument entirely. What Raiden found made his eyes tighten almost imperceptibly. "Your energy," Raiden said carefully. "It is not magic. It is not soul force. It is not any power I have encountered in all my years as Earthrealm's protector." He paused. "And yet, it is unmistakably the energy of a warrior, of someone who has fought for what matters to them." "That's pretty accurate," Goku said. Raiden was quiet for a moment, and the coliseum noise existing around them like weather, distant and irrelevant to the specific gravity of their conversation. When he spoke again, his voice was low enough that it carried only between them. "You arrived during Mortal Kombat," he said. "The sacred tournament that determines the fate of Earthrealm. The Elder God's law is absolute. Any being present in the tournament's arena during active competition is bound by its rules. You are, whether you intended it or not, a participant." Goku considered this. "What are the rules?" "You fight. You win or you lose." Raiden paused, and something heavy moved through his expression. "And in this tournament, under Shao Kahn's administration, losing is permanent." "They want me to kill people," Goku said. His voice had changed, not angry, not frightened, but very flat and very clear in a way that communicated something fundamental about where his limits were. "They want you to," Raiden confirmed. "The question is what you want." He studied Goku with those ancient, tired eyes. "Because Shao Kahn will not stop sending fighters, and the fighters he sends next will not be holding back the way Baraka was." Goku looked across the arena at where Baraka was being helped out of the crater he'd been deposited in, still refusing assistance with the stubborn pride of a warrior who had not yet fully accepted what had happened to him. He looked up at the Imperial box where Shao Kahn sat watching with the patient attention of a predator who had just decided something. He looked at Raiden. "I won't kill anyone," Goku said simply. "That's not something I'm going to change." Raiden nodded slowly. "Then we need to speak privately. Because what is coming..." He stopped himself, eyes cutting briefly to the Imperial box, with an expression Goku read immediately as the specific alertness of a man who knew he was being watched. What is coming requires you to understand this universe's rules before they are used against you. Above them, in the Imperial box, Shang Tsung observed the exchange between the stranger and the Thunder God with an expression of polite neutrality and the internal focus of a man solving the most interesting problem he'd encountered in centuries. The stranger's energy was extraordinary. His refusal to kill was a philosophical position that, in Outworld's framework, would constituted a critical vulnerability. And his conversation with Raiden meant that Earthrealm's protector had already identified him as an asset worth cultivating, which meant Shang Tsung needed to move faster than Raiden. He turned and slipped from the Imperial box with the quiet ease of a shadow detaching from a wall, already composing the first approach in his mind, already thinking about what a being with that much ki would feel like, flowing inward. His fingers were warm with anticipation. Raiden led him through passages beneath the coliseum that smelled of old blood and older stone. The tunnels ran deep under Outworld's arena, carved not by tools, but by something more fundamental. The weight of 10,000 years of tournament history pressing down through the rock above, until the passages had simply formed around the accumulated gravity of all that violence. Torches burned in brackets along the walls, but their light was wrong. Too orange, too thick, casting shadows that moved slightly out of sync with the flames that made them. Goku noticed that and filed it alongside the persistent low-frequency wrongness he'd been sensing since arrival. The sense of a universe running on rules that were adjacent to familiar but never quite the same. His ki was steady. He checked it the way a pilot checks instruments, not anxiously, but with the routine attentiveness of someone who understood that information was the foundation of everything else. Full reserves, clean output, no degradation. Whatever this universe was doing to the ambient energy around him, it hadn't found a way into his core yet. Raiden stopped in a chamber that had probably been a preparation room for fighters in some earlier era of the tournament. There were weapons racks along one wall, empty now, and the floor bore the particular worn smoothness of a space where nervous people had paced for a long time across many generations. He turned to face Goku with the gravity of a man about to explain something that had no comfortable version. Mortal Kombat is not simply a fighting tournament, he began. It is a cosmic law. The Elder Gods, beings of absolute authority who exist above the realm structure, decreed 10,000 years ago that no realm may conquer another through direct military force. Instead, each realm selects its greatest champions. They fight. 10 consecutive victories grants the winning realm the right of conquest. He paused. Outworld has won 9 consecutive tournaments. Goku did the arithmetic immediately. So, if Outworld wins one more, Earthrealm falls, Raiden confirmed. Its people become subjects of Shao Kahn. Its resources, its souls, its dimensional position, all absorbed into Outworld's empire. He held Goku's gaze. This is not metaphor. This is not political defeat. Unrealm conquest under Shao Kahn means the systematic destruction of everything that makes Earthrealm what it is. Goku was quiet for a moment. Outside, muffled by stone and distance, the coliseum noise continued its restless murmur. The crowd of Outworld settling into the interval between combats with the practiced patience of a culture built around, waiting for violence. He thought about Earth. His Earth, the specific, yet irreplaceable version of it where his sons lived and his friends trained, and the sky was a particular shade of blue that he'd never consciously appreciated until this moment of potential contrast. And my being here, he said slowly, makes things more complicated. Considerably, Raiden said. You arrived during active tournament proceedings. Elder God law is not flexible. It does not distinguish between intentional participants and accidental arrivals. You are here. You fought. You won. Under the law, you are now a tournament combatant, and your victories count toward the realm total. He paused again, with the particular weight of someone arriving at the part of the explanation they least wanted to give. The question is, which realm you fight for? Goku looked at him steadily. You want me to fight for Earthrealm? I am asking you to consider it, Raiden said, with a careful precision that separated the request from a command. You have the power to change the outcome of this tournament. The warriors Shao Kahn commands are extraordinary. Outworld's 9 consecutive victories were not accidents. They reflect genuine superiority in combat across decades of competition. Our current champions are skilled and brave, and they may not be enough. He looked at Goku with those ancient eyes that had watched civilizations rise and crumble and knew exactly what they were asking. You could be enough. If I fight for Earthrealm, Goku said, and I win, what happens to the people I beat? The fighters on Outworld's side? Raiden blinked. It was a small motion, but it carried genuine surprise. The reaction of a being who had spent millennia dealing with warriors whose primary concern in tournament discussions was power, strategy, advantage, not the welfare of the opponents. They survive under normal tournament rules. A Mortal Kombat does not require the death of every fallen combatant. It requires decisive victory. Shao Kahn's administration encourages fatalities, but they are not mandatory under Elder God law. Good, Goku said simply. Raiden studied him. You are an unusual being. People say that, Goku agreed. A sound reached them from the passage entrance. Footsteps, measured and deliberate, on the specific rhythm of someone who had learned long ago that entering a room confidently was halfway to controlling it. Both of them turned. Shang Tsung stepped into the preparation chamber, with his robe settling around him like smoke finding its level. His hands folded before him, his ancient face arranged in an expression of such perfectly calibrated pleasantness that it functioned as its own warning. And he looked between Raiden and Goku with the mild interest of a man who had arrived at a social gathering slightly after the interesting conversation started and was politely catching up. I hope I'm not interrupting, he said, in a voice like aged silk. Raiden's entire bearing shifted. The subtle but total change of a being who had dealt with Shang Tsung across decades and knew every layer of what that pleasant expression concealed. This conversation is private. Very little in Outworld is private, Shang Tsung replied pleasantly. He turned his attention to Goku, and something in his eyes that the pleasantness was designed to obscure became briefly, carefully visible. A hunger so profound and so ancient that it had transcended mere desire and become something closer to a fundamental orientation. The way a compass needle doesn't want north so much as it simply always points there. And I came to speak with our remarkable new arrival, directly, without the Thunder God's editorial influence. Goku looked at Shang Tsung with the same open, assessing attention he gave everything. The sorcerer's power level was not exceptional by his standards. Nothing here was, in the raw numerical sense. But the quality of his energy was unlike anything Goku had encountered. It was layered in a way that clean ki wasn't, and complex with the accumulated spiritual mass of thousands of harvested souls. Each one adding a different frequency to an overall signature that was dense and dark and extraordinarily dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with how hard someone could punch. His instincts, refined across a lifetime of fighting things that wanted to destroy the universe, were making a very specific and very loud noise about Shang Tsung. What do you want? Goku asked. Straightforward. No performance. Shang Tsung smiled. I want to offer you something Raiden cannot, he said. The Thunder God will ask you to fight for Earthrealm, to spend your power in service of his realm's survival, on his terms, under Elder God law that benefits his position. He tilted his head slightly. I am offering you something more valuable. Information. Specifically, the information about how to go home. The chamber was very quiet. Raiden's expression had gone carefully still. The stillness of a being exercising significant self-control. Goku looked at Shang Tsung for a long moment. The sorcerer met his gaze with that ancient, layered attention, and Goku felt something that he could only describe as pressure, not physical, not Kai-based, but the specific pressure of being looked at by something that was assessing you as a resource, rather than a person. You know how to send me back, Goku said, but I know the dimensional mechanics of this universe better than any living being, Shang Tsung said. Realms are my specialty. Their boundaries, their weaknesses, the precise frequencies at which barriers between universes can be manipulated. He paused with the timing of a man who had made 10,000 bargains and knew exactly where to place silence for maximum effect. I can send you home. All I require in return is something very simple. What? Goku asked. A single demonstration, Shang Tsung said softly. Let me study your energy, briefly, non-invasively. I have never encountered Ki in its pure form, your universe's fundamental power source. The academic value alone would be... No, Goku said. The word landed with the flat finality of a door closing. Shang Tsung's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. A rapid recalculation running beneath the pleasant surface like a current under ice. You haven't heard my full... You want to take something from me, Goku said. He wasn't angry. He was very calm, in the way that certain extremely powerful things are calm. Not because nothing bothers them, but because they've learned that calm is more effective than reaction. I don't know exactly what it is yet. But whatever you're calling a study, it's not that. He looked at Shang Tsung with clear, uncomplicated eyes. I'll find my own way home. Thanks, though. Shang Tsung looked at him for a moment longer. Then he smiled, a different smile than before. Thinner, with something genuine in it that was considerably less pleasant than the performed version. Of course, he said softly. The offer remains open. He turned and walked back into the passage without hurry, his robes settling around him, his footsteps measuring the stone with that same deliberate rhythm. At the threshold, he paused, without turning back. "But welcome to Outworld," he said. "Do try to survive it." And then he was gone, and the torchlight seemed fractionally brighter for his absence, and Raiden let out a long, slow breath that carried about 3 centuries of complicated history with Shang Tsung in its release. Goku watched the empty passage for a moment. "He's going to be a problem," he said. "He has been a problem," Raiden replied. "For a very long time." The tournament resumed at dawn. Outworld's sun rose differently than any sun Goku had experienced. It climbed the sky with a sluggish, bruised quality. Its light filtered through an atmosphere that carried compounds no human respiratory system had evolved to process. The sky above the coliseum shifted through colors that had no established names in any language Goku knew. Deep purples bleeding into oxidized oranges. The horizon marked by mountain ranges that had been carved by forces considerably more violent than geological time. It was beautiful in the specific way that dangerous things often were. A beauty that didn't invite you so much as warn you. Goku had spent the night in a chamber beneath the coliseum that Raiden had arranged. Stone walls, a sleeping mat that was more conceptual than functional, was in the persistent background frequency of Outworld's ambient energy pressing against his ki like a slow and patient hand. He hadn't slept much. Not from discomfort or anxiety, but because his mind had been working the problem with a methodical focus, it applied to any serious challenge. He was thinking about Shang Tsung. Specifically, he was thinking about what Shang Tsung had wanted, and the gap between what the sorcerer had said and what Goku's instincts had read beneath it. But the offer of a study had been a surface, something presentable, deniable, framed in the language of academic interest. What had lived underneath it was something Goku had encountered in a different form before, in the specific hunger that certain kinds of villains carried. The ones who didn't want to fight you so much as consume you, who looked at power and saw not a challenge, but an acquisition. Shang Tsung wanted his key, not to study it, to take it. The mechanism was still unclear, but the intention had been as readable as a power level to someone who had spent a lifetime calibrating their instincts against beings who wanted to unmake reality. Goku filed it as his most serious concern in this universe. More serious than Shao Kahn's raw power? More serious than the tournament's lethal culture? More serious than the problem of getting home? Because Shao Kahn's threat was external and Raiden's request was navigable, but Shang Tsung's hunger was the kind of thing that didn't announce itself before it moved. He was still thinking about it when the first fighter of the day arrived. Kitana came without ceremony. No tunnel entrance, no theatrical approach, simply present at the arena's edge in the early light. Her blue uniform precise, her steel fans folded at her hips, her face carrying the particular composed expression of someone managing significant internal conflict through the discipline of absolute external stillness. She was a princess of Outworld by Shao Kahn's forced adoption, a warrior of genuine extraordinary skill. And she was looking at Goku with an expression that was not the predatory assessment of an opponent, but something considerably more complicated. "I'm not here to fight you," she said. Her voice was clear and direct, stripped of the performance that colored most of Outworld's communications. "I watched yesterday. You beat Baraka without humiliating him. You stopped Erron Black without injuring him. She paused, and something moved across her composed features like weather crossing a landscape. "You fight like someone who believes their opponents have value." "They do," Goku said simply. Kitana was quiet for a moment, and in that silence, Goku could read the outline of a history he didn't know the details of. Something long and painful and complicated that had brought a warrior of her evident quality to a pre-dawn conversation with a stranger in a conquered emperor's arena. "Shao Kahn will send harder fighters today," she said finally. "He's been consulting with Shang Tsung since last night. They are not simply trying to win the tournament now." She held his gaze steadily. "They are trying to understand what you are so they can take it from you." "I figured," Goku said. "You need allies," Kitana said. "Real ones. Not Raiden's agenda and not Shang Tsung's bargains." She tilted her head slightly. "There are those in Outworld who are not Shao Kahn's instruments, who serve under compulsion, not loyalty, who would see this tournament end differently than he intends." Goku studied her with the attentive, uncomplicated assessment he gave everyone. No, Kitana's power was real, extraordinary by most standards, her combat skill refined across centuries of training and genuine battle. Her energy signature carried none of the dark layering that characterized Outworld's more corrupted fighters. It was clean in a way that stood out here the same way his own ki did, and he wondered if that was coincidence or something more fundamental about who she was. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "John, because you're the first person to walk into that arena and choose not to kill anyone," Kitana said. "In 10,000 years of this tournament, that has happened." She paused. "It hasn't happened." Before Goku could respond, the coliseum horn sounded. 3 long blasts that vibrated through the stone beneath their feet and signaled the resumption of combat. Kitana stepped back, her expression returning to its composed neutrality as if she'd drawn a curtain. "Fight well," she said quietly. "Dorka, and watch your ki." Shang Tsung has been asking questions about soul energy compatibility with foreign power sources. He's never asked those questions before. She held his gaze for one more moment. That means he's never found a power source like yours before. She was gone before he could respond, moving through the early light with the fluid economy of a warrior who had spent centuries learning to be invisible when she needed to be. Goku turned back to the arena, and the morning's first opponent was already waiting. Reptile crouched at the center of the arena floor in his bipedal lizard form. Scales the color of deep jungle shadow, claws extended, his invisible spectrum vision already locked on Goku's position with the patient. Unblinking attention of a predator that had evolved over millions of years to hunt things that didn't know they were being hunted. His abilities ran deeper than physical combat. Acid spit capable of dissolving stone, a force ball of concentrated reptilian energy, and most dangerously, complete invisibility that operated on principles that had nothing to do with light manipulation and everything to do with a biological capacity that predated human science by geological epochs. He vanished the moment Goku stepped into the arena. Goku stopped walking, closed his eyes, let his ki sense expand outward in all directions simultaneously. Not searching for a power level, because Reptile's energy signature was minimal and carefully suppressed, but feeling for the specific distortion in ambient energy that an invisible physical body created just by existing. Mass displaced air. Displaced air created microcurrents. Microcurrents interacted with the ambient outworld energy in patterns that were faint but consistent and completely readable, to a sense refined enough to detect a suppressed power level from 50 miles away. He tracked Reptile across the arena for 11 seconds. The lizard moving in a patient, tightening spiral, closing distance with the absolute confidence of something that had never been perceived while invisible. When Reptile lunged, Goku was already turning, already moving to meet him, his hand intercepting the acid-laced strike with a ki-reinforced forearm that neutralized the corrosive chemistry on contact. The hiss of acid meeting ki was sharp and brief, a small violence of competing energies that left a thin line of steam rising between them. Reptile's invisibility dropped from pure surprise. They fought for 20 minutes. It was the most technically complex fight Goku had experienced since his arrival. Reptile's invisibility cycling in and out. The acid attacks requiring ki reinforcement rather than direct blocking. The force balls demanding lateral movement rather than straight deflection. Goku adapted in real time, his combat intelligence working at full capacity, finding the rhythms beneath the chaos, learning the specific grammar of an opponent whose every ability was designed to circumvent normal combat assumptions. He won without a fatality, as he had won before. A precise strike that rendered Reptile unconscious, with the careful application of exactly enough force, and not a single unit more. The crowd's reaction was becoming something different than it had been yesterday. The confusion was still there. But underneath it, something was shifting. A recalibration happening across thousands of outworld citizens who had been raised on a tournament culture of absolute finality, and were now, fight by fight, being shown a different philosophy enacted at a level of power that demanded their attention. In the Imperial box, Shao Kahn watched Reptile being carried from the arena and said nothing for a long time. Beside him, a new figure had joined the observation platform sometime during the fight. A woman whose presence carried a specific atmospheric quality, regal and cold and sharp-edged as a blade left in winter air. Sindel, queen of Outworld by conquest and tragedy, stood at the railing with her silver hair moving slightly in the high-altitude wind and her eyes fixed on the orange-clad figure below with an expression that Shao Kahn recognized. She was assessing him as a problem to be solved. Shang Tsung's approach failed, she said without preamble or particular inflection. Shang Tsung's approach was preliminary, Shao Kahn replied. He was establishing parameters. He was being refused, Sindel said, cleanly and without hesitation. She turned from the railing to look at Shao Kahn directly. This warrior has a code. Codes are not weaknesses. They are maps. They tell you exactly where the edges are. Her eyes moved back to Goku. We need to find what exists beyond his edges. Shao Kahn looked at her for a moment. And you have a suggestion. I have an observation, Sindel said. He will not kill. He will not take Shang Tsung's bargains. He is listening to Raiden, but not committing to him. She paused. He is, as yet, uncommitted to anyone. And uncommitted warriors. She let the sentence find its own conclusion in the silence between them. Can be committed by the right pressure, Shao Kahn finished. Below them, Goku was helping Reptile's handlers locate where exactly the unconscious lizard man had landed, navigating the language barrier with a combination of gestures and expressions that was somehow working despite everything. Sindel watched this with an unreadable expression. Find his pressure point, she said quietly. Every warrior has one. The invitation arrived at midnight. Not delivered by messenger or magical conveyance, simply present, the way Netherrealm communications tended to be present, existing in a space where nothing had existed a moment before, with a casual disregard for physical law that characterized a realm built on different foundational rules than the ones governing normal space. It materialized on the stone floor of Goku's chamber as a scroll sealed with wax the color of dried blood, and on the moment it appeared, the ambient temperature in the room dropped 4 degrees and the torchlight contracted slightly, as if the flame itself was uncertain about the new arrival's implications. Goku picked it up, broke the seal, and read it. The script was in a language he didn't know, which should have made the content inaccessible. But the scroll had been prepared by someone who understood that their intended recipient would face exactly this problem, and woven into the parchment itself was a subtle translating enchantment. Not magical in the Kai-based sense, but something older and more fundamental. The kind of working that operated at the level of cognition rather than energy, reshaping the reader's perception rather than the text itself. The words resolved themselves in Goku's mind with the uncomfortable intimacy of thoughts that weren't his own. Warrior from beyond the realms. Fort, you carry power that neither Shao Kahn's empire nor Raiden's righteousness can properly value. I can offer you what both have failed to, genuine passage home, and the knowledge of your universe's dimensional signature that makes such passage possible. Come to the Netherrealm's threshold at the tournament's eastern boundary. Come alone. Quan Chi. Goku set the scroll down and thought about it. He thought about it the way he thought about everything tactical. Not with suspicion as a default setting, because suspicion wasn't his natural orientation, but with the honest application of everything his instincts were telling him about this universe and the specific category of entities he'd encountered within it. Shang Tsung had wanted something from him. Raiden wanted something from him. Kitana had offered something that felt genuine, but was still, at its core, an alignment request. And now Quan Chi, a name Raiden had mentioned in their underground conversation with an expression that reserved for things he considered genuinely dangerous, was offering the one thing that all of them had understood was Goku's actual priority. Getting home. He went, not because he trusted Quan Chi, His instincts had already rendered a clear verdict on that question before he'd finished reading the scroll. He went because information was its own form of power. And because the tournament had shown him that this universe's players were all moving simultaneously toward goals they hadn't fully disclosed. And the only way to navigate that landscape was to understand each piece of it directly, rather than through the filtered versions that Raiden's agenda or Kitana's careful disclosures provided. Also, honestly, he was curious. And the eastern boundary of the tournament grounds was where the coliseum's outer wall met the beginning of Outworld's wilderness. A transition that happened suddenly, the way transitions in Outworld tended to happen, without the gradual buffer zones that softer landscapes provided. One moment there was worked stone and torchlight, and the distant murmur of an encamped tournament population. The next, there was nothing but the specific quality of Outworld's night, which was darker than darkness in the straightforward physical sense, and carried in it a resonance that pressed against Goku's ki with more intensity than the daytime ambient energy had managed. This close to the Netherrealm's threshold, the dark energy was not background noise. It was a presence. Quan Chi was waiting. The Netherrealm sorcerer was physically unimposing in the way that certain extremely dangerous things were unimposing. Not large, not physically threatening. His pale skin and dark robes and the elaborate markings across his features communicating a power that was entirely internal, entirely of the mind and the will, and the accumulated dark knowledge of a being who had operated in a realm built on suffering for longer than most living things had existed. His eyes were the specific flat red of something that had moved beyond the emotional spectrum that produced normal human eye coloration and arrived somewhere considerably colder. He looked at Goku with those flat eyes and said nothing for a moment. Goku looked back at him and felt his ki instinctively consolidate. Not a powered-up response, but the specific tightening that happened automatically in the presence of something his body recognized as a particular category of threat. Not a strong opponent threat, a wrong kind of danger threat, the kind that didn't come at you directly. "You came," Quan Chi said. His voice was the auditory equivalent of his eyes, flat, cold, stripped of the performance that Shang Tsung layered into everything he said. "You said you could get me home," Goku said. "I want to hear the actual offer." "Direct," Quan Chi observed, without inflection. "Good. Then I will be equally direct." He folded his hands before him in a gesture that mirrored Shang Tsung's habitual posture, but felt entirely different. Where Shang Tsung's folded hands were a performance of composure, Quan Chi's were simply the resting position of someone who had never needed to perform anything. "I can open a dimensional aperture to your universe of origin. The mathematical framework of your key signature serves as a navigational coordinate. It is unique enough to identify your reality's dimensional frequency with precision. I have the power to execute the crossing." "And what do you want for that?" Goku asked. "Your service," Quan Chi said. "Temporary, specific, else you would fight under Netherrealm's banner in 3 designated conflicts of my choosing. After the 3rd conflict, the aperture opens and you return home." He paused. No soul harvesting, no energy extraction. Simply your combat capability applied to problems that require it. Goku was quiet for a moment. The Netherrealm's threshold behind Quan Chi pulsed with a slow, dark rhythm. The boundary between realms, visible here as a shimmer in reality, that was the dimensional equivalent of a very old scar. Through it, at the edge of perception, Goku could sense what existed on the other side. A realm built on pain, populated by the enslaved souls of the dead, governed by rules that were the inversion of everything his universe's afterlife represented. The dead were not at rest in the Netherrealm. They were tools. "Tell me about the 3 conflicts," Goku said. Quanchi's expression didn't change, but something behind those flat eyes moved. The slight recalibration of someone who had expected an earlier refusal and was now genuinely engaged. The first would involve neutralizing a Titan-class entity currently destabilizing the boundary between Outworld and Netherrealm. The second, "Who are the souls in the Netherrealm?" Goku interrupted. "The ones you'd use me to fight alongside or against?" A pause. "Revenant warriors? Fallen champions reanimated under Netherrealm's power. They retain their combat abilities, but serve the realm's will." "Against their own will," Goku said. It wasn't a question. Quan Chi considered his response with the careful precision of someone choosing between multiple framings. "Their original will no longer exist in any meaningful—" "No," Goku said. The word had the same flat finality it had carried when he'd refused Shang Tsung. But this time, something else accompanied it. A very quiet, very controlled anger that didn't raise his power level or change his expression, but was present in the specific quality of his stillness. The way absolute cold is present in winter air without needing to announce itself. "Taking someone's will," Goku said, "is worse than killing them. You've done something to those people that they can't even fight back against." He looked at Quan Chi steadily. "I won't work for something that does that. Not for any price." Quan Chi looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, with the flat curiosity of someone filing new data rather than reacting emotionally, "You are remarkably consistent." "People say that too," Goku said. "Your refusal is noted," Quan Chi said. "But understand something, warrior." He took a single step forward, and the Netherrealm's threshold behind him pulsed once, darker, in a rhythm that felt almost like emphasis. "This universe does not reward consistency. It rewards pragmatism. The beings who survive here long-term are the ones who understand that principles are a currency. Valuable in small amounts, ruinous when hoarded." He turned back toward the threshold with the unhurried movement of someone who had delivered his actual message and considered the negotiation secondary. "When your principles cost you more than you can pay, the offer will still be available." He stepped through the shimmer and was gone, and the threshold sealed behind him with a sound like a sigh. And Goku stood alone at the boundary between realms in Outworld's wrong-colored night. His ki was still steady. He checked it again, and more carefully this time, running his awareness through his energy reserves with the thoroughness of someone who had just been in close proximity to 2 sorcerers who both wanted what was inside him and was taking nothing for granted. Still clean, still full, still his. But as he turned back toward the coliseum, something made him pause, a new sensation in the ambient energy around him. Faint but distinct, like a single wrong note in a familiar song. And the dark energy of the Netherrealm's threshold was expected. The ambient outworld pressure was expected. But underneath both of them, threading through his Kai reserves with the patience of something that moved very slowly precisely because it didn't want to be noticed, something had changed. Not much, not enough to quantify, but enough that his instincts, those finely calibrated instruments that had saved his life more times than he could count, they raised a flag that he couldn't immediately explain and couldn't afford to ignore. He walked back toward the coliseum through Outworld's bruised night and thought about Kitana's warning. "Watch your ki." He was watching. He found Raiden at dawn in the same preparation chamber where they'd first spoken properly. The Thunder God standing before a wall of stone with his back to the entrance and his hands behind him and the particular quality of stillness that meant he'd been there for hours, not resting, but the active stillness of a being running calculations that required the full weight of his attention and couldn't be interrupted without cost. Goku told him about Quan Chi, all of it, the scroll, the threshold meeting, the offer, the refusal, and the thing he'd felt in his Kai reserves on the walk back. He laid it out with the direct economy of someone who had learned that incomplete information was more dangerous than no information. Watching Raiden's expression move through a sequence of reactions that told their own story. Concern at the meeting itself. Something deeper and more troubled at the offer's specific terms, and at the mention of the key anomaly. A stillness that was different from his earlier stillness, sharper, the quality of a being who has just heard confirmation of something they had feared but not verified. "Show me," Raiden said. Goku extended his key outward in a controlled diagnostic pulse. The same technique he'd used to track Reptile through invisibility, turned inward instead, mapping his own energy reserves with the precision of long familiarity. And Raiden reached out with his divine senses alongside it, the Thunder God's perception running parallel to Goku's own, two different instruments reading the same subject. They both found it at the same moment. It was small, extraordinarily small, a thread of foreign energy woven into the outer layer of Goku's ki reserves, with a delicacy that was genuinely impressive in its craft. The kind of working that required not just power, but the specific patience of a being who thought in decades rather than moments. It didn't draw energy. It didn't corrupt or disrupt. It simply existed there, passive and watchful. A monitoring filament that reported the state of Goku's ki to whatever consciousness had placed it, without taking anything or leaving any mark beyond its own invisible presence. Except that Goku had found it. And the moment he found it and understood what it was, a cold clarity moved through him that was not anger exactly, but was the specific focused state that anger became when it had somewhere productive to go. Someone had threaded a surveillance line into his energy reserves. Not Quan Chi. The meeting at the threshold had been a distraction, he realized now, and the entire negotiation a piece of misdirection, while something else had used the proximity to the Netherrealm's dark energy as cover for a working that required him to be standing near a sufficiently powerful source of soul magic. Not Quan Chi. Shang Tsung. He used the threshold meeting, Goku said quietly. While I was standing next to all that dark energy, he slipped this in. The Netherrealm's signature would have masked the insertion. Raiden's expression was grave. "It is a soul sense filament," he confirmed. "Ancient technique. Shang Tsung developed it across centuries of soul harvesting. It is the precursor to extraction. First, you map the target's energy." He paused. "Then you know exactly where to reach." "How do I remove it?" Goku asked. "Burning it out with raw Kai would work," Raiden said. "But the backlash would disrupt your own reserves temporarily. In tournament conditions, I'd be vulnerable during removal," Goku finished. Yes." They looked at each other across the preparation chamber, and the weight of the situation settled between them with the particular density of a problem that had no clean solution. Only choices between different kinds of difficulty. Goku's ki was being mapped in real time. Shang Tsung knew the architecture of his energy reserves with increasing precision, the filament building a picture that would eventually become a roadmap for extraction, and removing it safely required time and conditions that the tournament schedule was not inclined to provide. "There's something else," Raiden said. His voice had changed, taken on the specific quality of difficult news being delivered by someone who had learned, across millennia, to lead with the fact rather than building toward it. I received word this morning from Liu Kang. The name registered for Goku as one of the significant powers he'd identified on his mental map of this universe. The Fire God Champion. The being Raiden had mentioned as Earthrealm's ultimate defender, whose divine authority over flame and time made him the closest thing this universe had to a cosmic-level player. "He's coming to the tournament," Raiden said. "Not to fight, to assess." He held Goku's gaze steadily. Liu Kang is the protector of all realms' timeline. His authority supersedes Elder God tournament law in matters of temporal and dimensional stability. And your presence here. Raiden paused with the weight of someone choosing their words with surgical care. A being of your power, from outside this universe's dimensional framework, participating in Mortal Kombat. It creates instabilities that Liu Kang cannot ignore. "He's coming to decide what to do with me," Goku said. "He's coming to determine whether your presence here constitutes an acceptable anomaly or an existential threat to the timeline," Raiden said. "Those are not the same determination, but they lead to some of the same options." Goku was quiet for a moment. Outside, the coliseum was waking up. The sounds of a tournament population beginning its day, the distant clash of preparation sparring, the low, continuous murmur of thousands of beings going about the ordinary business of existing in a universe built around extraordinary violence. He thought about the filament in his ki. He thought about Shang Tsung's patience and Quan Chi's cold pragmatism and Shao Kahn's imperial calculation, and now Liu Kang's incoming authority arriving like a verdict before the trial had concluded. He thought about the thing Kitana had said in the early light of the arena. He is the first person to walk into that arena and choose not to kill anyone. "Raiden," he said, "if I fight for Earthrealm, if I compete properly, win the matches that need to be won, does that protect the people in those fights? The Outworld warriors?" Raiden considered this carefully. Tournament victory requires decisive defeat of opponents, not their deaths. If you win under Elder God law rather than Shao Kahn's preferred rules. He paused. The Emperor has been administering these tournaments with lethal preference for so long that most participants treat the killing as mandatory. It is not. It has simply been enforced as such. "So, if I win without killing," Goku said slowly, "I'm not just winning matches. I'm rewriting what the tournament is." "Yes," Raiden said, "which is precisely why Shao Kahn needs you neutralized before you reach the final rounds, and why Shang Tsung's filament is not merely surveillance." He looked at Goku with those ancient eyes. "It is preparation for a harvest that would remove you from the tournament permanently." The doors of the preparation chamber opened. Liu Kang entered. He was younger looking than his authority suggested. A lean figure in red and black, his expression carrying the particular compound weight of someone who held responsibility for things that would break most beings who tried to carry them. The fire god aspect was present but subtle, a contained heat that existed beneath his skin rather than on it. The specific energy signature of divine power that had been fully integrated rather than worn externally. His eyes found Goku immediately and stayed there with an assessment that was more thorough and more multidimensional than anything Goku had been subjected to since his arrival. "You," Liu Kang said, "are a problem." "I've been hearing that a lot," Goku said. "I don't mean it as an insult," Liu Kang said, moving into the room with the economy of someone who had learned to waste nothing, not movement, not words, not attention. "I mean it as an accurate description of what your presence does to this universe's temporal architecture. Every action you take here creates branches. Every fight you win rewrites probability chains that extend centuries forward." He stopped 6 feet from Goku and held his gaze. I have seen timelines. I have rebuilt them. I understand their fragility in a way that is not theoretical. He paused. You are the single largest uncontrolled variable I have encountered in any timeline I have managed. What does that mean for me? Goku asked. Liu Kang was quiet for a moment, that had the specific quality of genuine deliberation rather than dramatic pause. It means, he said finally, that I have a choice to make, and I would rather make it with your input than without it. He looked at Goku steadily, like, so tell me, what do you actually want? Not what Raiden wants, not what Shao Kahn wants, not what Shang Tsung is planning to take. His voice was direct and without performance. What does Goku want? The question landed in the preparation chamber with unexpected weight. Goku looked at Liu Kang, at the fire god's direct eyes and the genuine authority behind them, and the specific quality of a being asking a real question rather than constructing the approach to a predetermined conclusion, and felt something settle in him that had been in motion since the moment he'd hit the coliseum floor. I want to go home, he said, but not before this is finished properly. Liu Kang tilted his head slightly. Define properly. Shang Tsung has something in my ki that I need removed, Goku said. Shao Kahn is going to keep running this tournament like a death sentence until someone stops him. And there are warriors in the Netherrealm who've had their will taken from them. He looked at Liu Kang with clear, uncomplicated eyes. No, I don't leave until those 3 things are addressed. A silence followed that had the quality of recalibration. Liu Kang's assessment running rapid updates behind his composed expression. Raiden watching both of them with the careful attention of a being who had learned that the most important conversations were the ones you listened to rather than managed. Then Liu Kang said something that neither of them had expected. All right, he said. Then we have work to do. The plan required 3 things to happen simultaneously. Liu Kang laid it out in the preparation chamber with the precise economy of someone who had architected timeline restorations and understood that complexity, left unmanaged, became chaos faster than any enemy could arrange. First, the filament in Goku's ki needed to be removed under controlled conditions before Shang Tsung could trigger extraction. Second, Shao Kahn needed to be drawn into direct confrontation on terms that Elder God Law could witness and adjudicate. Not a tournament fight, but a formal challenge to his administration of Mortal Kombat, which under the original Cosmic Compact carried weight even Imperial authority couldn't simply override. Third, the revenant warriors in the Netherrealm service needed a disruption powerful enough to sever Quan Chi's binding architecture without destroying the souls themselves. 3 things, simultaneously. With Shang Tsung actively monitoring Goku's ki through the filament, Shao Kahn's intelligence network covering every significant movement within the tournament grounds, and Quan Chi presumably aware that his threshold meeting had produced no alliance and adjusting his strategy accordingly. You're describing an operation that requires perfect coordination across 3 separate theaters, Goku said. Yes, Liu Kang said, but with people we're not entirely sure we can trust completely. Also yes. Goku nodded slowly. Okay, what do I do? The filament removal fell to Raiden and Liu Kang, working in combination, the Thunder God's divine electrical energy and Liu Kang's Fire God aspect, creating a dual-frequency environment that could cauterize the foreign thread without triggering the backlash that burning it with raw ki would have caused. It required Goku to remain completely still for 4 minutes. His ki held at absolute minimum output. which in practical terms meant sitting cross-legged in the preparation chamber, radiating less energy than he ever voluntarily produced, and trusting two beings he'd known for less than 3 days to work inside his most fundamental reserves. He sat down, crossed his legs, and closed his eyes. This was, he reflected, a significant act of trust for someone who had watched both of these beings operate with agendas that ran alongside his own interests without perfectly aligning with them. Raiden wanted Earthrealm protected. Liu Kang wanted temporal stability. Both of those goals happened to currently include keeping Goku functional, which was reassuring without being the same as unconditional. But Kitana had trusted them, and his own instincts, which had served him across a lifetime of reading the genuine core of beings beneath whatever surface they presented, said that the specific quality of Liu Kang's direct attention was not the attention of someone constructing a manipulation. It was the attention of someone who was tired of manipulations and had decided, at least in this context, to try something different. He let his Kai go quiet. The removal took 6 minutes, not 4, and Raiden's lightning and Liu Kang's fire worked in careful alternation along the filament's threading, and Goku felt the process as a faint, precise discomfort. The sensation of something being pulled free from a very delicate space. Not painful exactly, but deeply uncomfortable in the specific way that violations of internal integrity always were, regardless of their scale. When it was done, he felt the filament leave his Kai reserves with a sensation like a splinter being drawn from beneath a fingernail, and the ambient quality of his energy shifted immediately. Cleaner, more fully his own, the subtle wrongness he'd been carrying since the threshold meeting resolving into the clear, familiar signature he'd carried his entire life. He opened his eyes. Liu Kang was watching him with an expression that had something new in it. Not warmth, exactly, but the specific quality of respect that emerged from watching someone demonstrate a particular kind of courage that had nothing to do with power levels. "It's clean," he said. "Completely." "Good," Goku said. He stood, rolled his shoulders, and felt his ki respond with its full familiar ease, unless the difference was more significant than he'd expected. Like the difference between breathing normally and breathing normally after something had been pressing lightly against your chest for days without your full awareness. Now tell me Shang Tsung felt that. He felt it, Raiden confirmed, with a gravity that was itself a form of warning. The filament severance would have registered as an immediate alert. He knows the harvest window is closed. He paused, which means he moves to contingency. "What's his contingency?" Goku asked. "Force," Liu Kang said simply. "Direct magical assault during tournament combat, where Elder God Law limits intervention. He'll choose a moment when you're already engaged and add his own working to the opponent's attack. Compound the variables until something breaks through." He met Goku's eyes. His soul magic is most effective against targets who are already under physical duress. It finds the gaps that combat stress creates. "So he waits for me to be in a hard fight," Goku said, "and hits me while I'm occupied." "Yes." "Then I need to give him a fight that looks hard enough to justify moving," Goku said, "but isn't actually hard enough to create real gaps." Liu Kang studied him for a moment. "You're describing using yourself as bait." "I'm describing a tournament fight where I perform worse than I actually am," Goku said, with the mild reasonableness of someone proposing something that was objectively somewhat insane. "Which I've never done intentionally, but I can do it." The second theater of the operation belonged to Kitana. She had spent the night moving through the layers of Outworld's tournament encampment with the invisible efficiency of someone who had spent centuries learning which conversations happened where and who was genuinely loyal to Shao Kahn, versus who served from fear or calculation. But the distinction mattered because the formal challenge to Shao Kahn's tournament administration required witnesses, not just participants, but figures of sufficient standing in Outworld's political hierarchy that their presence constituted an official record under realm law. Kitana had the relationships to arrange this. She also had, as it turned out, like the motivation, the specific compound of long-suppressed fury and carefully maintained discipline that made her the most dangerous kind of opponent. The kind that had been patient long enough and was finally done being patient. She arrived at the preparation chamber 2 hours before the morning session with a list of names. Warriors and court figures who would witness the challenge, who had private reasons to want Shao Kahn's tournament authority questioned, and who were sufficiently self-interested to show up without committing themselves to the outcome in advance. Goku looked at the list. Will they be safe? If this goes wrong? Define wrong, Kitana said. If Shao Kahn decides to stop respecting tournament law, Goku said. Kitana's expression was the specific compound of someone who had been asking that question about their own safety for their entire adult life. Then we will all be in the same position we've always been in, she said quietly. Except we'll have tried something. The third theater was Liu Kang's alone. He didn't explain exactly what he intended to do about the Netherrealm revenants, and Goku didn't push, partly because the timeline architecture implications were beyond his current understanding of this universe's rules, and partly because Liu Kang's expression when the subject came up carried the specific quality of something he'd been carrying for a long time and intended to address with or without the current circumstances providing convenient cover. Some things, Goku had learned, ran deeper than tactical planning. They ran in the territory of things that needed doing, because they needed doing, independent of optimal timing. The morning session began. Goku walked into the arena with the filament gone and his ki clean and the plan running across 3 theaters simultaneously, and found his opponent already waiting in the center of the floor. Sindel stood there with her silver hair loose around her shoulders and her expression carrying none of the regal composure Goku had observed from the Imperial box. Up close, without the distance and the elevation and the framing of power that Shao Kahn's proximity provided. But she was a different kind of formidable, her power concentrated and precise, her eyes holding the specific quality of a being who had made peace with the cost of what she was about to do. She was not fighting because Shao Kahn had ordered it. Goku read that immediately. She was fighting because she had chosen to, and that distinction mattered in ways that a simple command performance wouldn't have. "You've been a significant disruption," she said. Her voice was the clear, carrying tone of someone accustomed to filling large spaces with authority. "I hear that a lot too," Goku said. The fight began without further ceremony. Sindel was extraordinary. Her combat style blended physical mastery with the specific weaponized quality of her screaming power. Sonic attacks that operated at frequencies designed to disrupt nervous systems, and her hair that moved as a prehensile combat instrument with a reach and striking force that completely reconfigured the geometry of close combat, and a regal precision that applied every element of her capability with zero waste. She was not testing him. She was fighting him, fully and immediately, and the first exchange crossed the arena floor in a blur of silver hair and sonic force, and Goku's ki-reinforced responses that left 4 separate impact craters in the stone and the crowd on its feet before either of them had drawn a full breath. This was the fight that needed to look hard. Goku performed. Not dishonestly, he didn't manufacture false vulnerability or telegraph weaknesses that didn't exist. But he fought at a level that was genuinely challenged by Sindel's capability, while not accessing the upper registers of his power that would have resolved the fight in seconds. He took hits, real ones, Sindel's physical strikes landed with a force that would have been catastrophic against anyone without his durability. And her sonic attacks created genuine interference with his Kai output that required active management rather than passive resistance. He bled from a cut above his eye after 7 minutes. He let it bleed. In the observation area adjacent to the Imperial box, Shang Tsung watched the fight with those ancient eyes and felt the specific quality of opportunity presenting itself. The stranger was struggling, not overwhelmed, not broken, but genuinely pressed, his ki output fluctuating with the management demands of Sindel's attacks. The filament was gone, but Shang Tsung had spent 6 minutes with its readings and understood the architecture of those ki reserves better than the stranger probably knew. He knew exactly where to reach. He began to gather his working, the soul magic built in his hands with the careful precision of 10 lifetimes of practice. Not a dramatic manifestation, but a fine, targeted construct. A thread of extractive force designed to slip through the gaps that combat stress created and find the ki reserves beneath. He needed Sindel's next major attack to create a sufficient distraction. He watched the fight with absolute focus, waiting for his moment, the working humming between his fingers with terrible patient potential. And Sindel wound up for her most powerful sonic scream, the full capacity version that had leveled stone fortifications. And Goku braced against it, with his ki pulled inward for maximum concentration. Shang Tsung reached, and hit something that wasn't there. The ki reserves he'd mapped through the filament had been reorganized. Subtly, deliberately, in the hours since the filament's removal. The architecture shifted just enough that the extractive thread found different geography than it expected, and discharged into empty internal space, with a backlash that snapped back through the working like a whip. Shang Tsung staggered. Goku looked directly at him from across the arena and smiled. The smile lasted exactly as long as it took Shang Tsung to recover his composure, which was not long. The sorcerer straightened from his stagger with the practiced smoothness of a being who had survived catastrophic failures across 10 lifetimes, and knew that the distance between defeat and recovery was almost always shorter than your opponent hoped. His expression settled back into its pleasant neutrality with the speed of a mask being replaced. And only someone watching with Goku's specific attentiveness would have caught the thing that flickered in his eyes before the mask was fully seated. Not embarrassment, not fear, but the cold recalibration of a predator acknowledging that the prey had demonstrated unexpected capability. Then Shao Kahn stood up. The Imperial box went silent around him as the Emperor rose to his full height, and the silence spread outward from that point like a wave, unmoving through the coliseum tiers with the speed of instinct. Thousands of Outworld citizens whose survival instincts had been trained across generations to read the specific quality of Shao Kahn's stillness as a signal that required immediate attention. The fight between Goku and Sindel continued below, but it was suddenly peripheral, a background event against the foreground weight of the Emperor deciding something. He raised his hand. Mikar, the tournament horn sounded. Not the between-round signal, but the Imperial suspension call. 3 short blasts followed by 1 long one, a sequence that hadn't been used in living memory because Shao Kahn had never needed to suspend his own tournament before. Sindel stopped mid-movement with the trained obedience of a warrior who understood that particular signal regardless of circumstance. Goku stopped because Sindel stopped, his combat instincts reading her cessation as information and processing it accordingly. The Coliseum waited. Shao Kahn descended. He didn't take the stairs. He dropped from the Imperial box to the arena floor directly, the impact of his landing sending a shockwave through the stone that cracked the surface in a 10-foot radius and raised a cloud of ancient dust. And he straightened from the impact with the unhurried authority of a being who had never needed to hurry in his life. because everything that needed to accommodate him had always found a way to do so. His hammer materialized in his hand. Not summoned dramatically, but simply present. The way things tended to be present around beings of sufficient power, the universe making the small courtesy of not requiring them to reach. He walked toward Goku across the cracked stone floor. The crowd made no sound. Goku watched him come with clear eyes and a key signature that had stopped performing and was now simply itself. The clean, enormous, utterly alien energy of a Saiyan who had died and been wished back and transcended and trained under the weight of gods and fought beings who wanted to unmake everything. Radiating outward into Outworld's ambient energy like a second sun in an atmosphere that had never experienced direct sunlight. "Enough performance," Shao Kahn said. His voice was the controlled thunder of a being who had used it to command armies for 10 millennia. "You and I are going to settle this directly. This isn't a tournament match," Goku said. "No," Shao Kahn agreed. "It is not." From the edges of the arena, Raiden moved, stepping forward with his staff in hand and his expression carrying the compound alarm of a being who had spent centuries managing Shao Kahn's violations of cosmic law and recognized the specific quality of what was happening as something that existed outside the tournament's protective framework. "Shao Kahn," he said, his voice carrying the resonant authority of a thunder god fully engaged. "Direct combat outside tournament protocol violates Elder God law." "Let the Elder Gods come," Shao Kahn said, without looking at Raiden. His eyes stayed on Goku with the absolute focus of a conqueror who had identified his objective and removed everything else from his field of attention. "They can watch." Goku looked at Raiden. The Thunder God's expression communicated several things simultaneously. The legal reality that Shao Kahn was correct, that this violated Elder God law and would draw consequences. The tactical reality that stopping it would require a physical intervention that would create its own complications, and underneath both of those, visible only because Goku had spent 3 days learning to read this universe's most experienced player. A third thing. Relief, because this was what the formal challenge required. Not Kitana's witnesses and realm law documentation and the careful political architecture of a structured objection, but Shao Kahn himself, in front of the entire tournament population, choosing to step outside the law he was supposed to administer, choosing to make it personal, making it something the Elder Gods couldn't ignore. Goku turned back to Shao Kahn. "Okay," he said. The Emperor of Outworld, moved with the explosive power of a being who had conquered 10 realms through direct physical dominance. His hammer coming around in an opening strike that carried enough force to level a small mountain, the displaced air ahead of it arriving as a pressure wave that preceded the impact by a half second and would have been the most dangerous thing in the fight if Goku hadn't already moved. He went up, straight up, ki-propelled, the hammer passing through the space where he'd been standing and hitting the arena floor with an impact that sent a crater 20 feet wide and 8 feet deep, erupting upward in a fountain of shattered stone. Goku came back down from 40 feet above with a kick that hit Shao Kahn's raised forearm with a crack that echoed off the coliseum walls and drove the Emperor 3 steps sideways for the first time in the memory of everyone watching. The crowd made a sound, not the bloodlust roar of a killing blow. Something rawer and more complicated. The sound of a certainty being questioned by an audience that had built their entire cultural framework around one man's invincibility. Shao Kahn recovered and came back immediately, and the fight became real. He was powerful in a way that deserved full respect, not Goku's level, not close to it in the absolute numerical sense, but powerful with the specific quality of someone who had spent 10,000 years refining every unit of their capability into the most efficient possible instrument of conquest. His strikes were not merely strong, they were precise in the way that millennia of actual combat produced, carrying the specific weight of someone who knew exactly where to hit and exactly how hard. And his armor amplified his physical output in ways that pushed his effective power considerably beyond his baseline. The hammer's enchantments added dimensional force to physical impact, each strike carrying a destabilizing quality that affected not just Goku's body, but the ki around it, disrupting his aura in localized bursts that required constant active management. Goku took the fight seriously. Not Super Saiyan God, not Ultra Instinct. He fought in his base Super Saiyan form, golden hair, amplified ki, under the transformation he'd first achieved through the pure emotional force of losing a friend, and had carried ever since as his most fundamental power state. Against Shao Kahn, this was the right level. Enough power to demonstrate genuine capability, enough restraint to avoid ending the fight before the Elder Gods had time to observe and respond, and enough challenge to force the Emperor into the full expression of his power, where the entire tournament population could witness it clearly. The arena was being destroyed around them. Impact by impact, the ancient stone that had held tournament history for 10,000 years was coming apart. Craters overlapping craters, the floor developing a topography of violence that told the story of the fight in geological terms. The walls cracked. The lower-tier seating shed stone dust in continuous curtains. The coliseum that had been built to contain Outworld's greatest conflicts was discovering that it had been designed around a ceiling that no longer applied. Shang Tsung watched from the Imperial box with his hands very still, and his ancient eyes running calculations that had abandoned the harvest entirely and were now focused on a different and more immediate question: whether the structure he was standing in was going to survive the next 5 minutes. Beside him, the Imperial box was empty. Sindel had descended to the arena level and was standing at its edge with an expression that Shang Tsung, in 40 years of close observation, had never seen on her face. She was watching Shao Kahn being pushed backward across his own arena by a being in an orange gi, and she was watching it with the specific quality of someone seeing something they had stopped believing was possible, and were now recalibrating around the evidence of its reality. As Shao Kahn caught Goku with a full-power hammer strike that connected, Goku having calculated that absorbing one genuine hit was worth the information it provided about the weapon's dimensional force component. The impact drove him across the arena and into the far wall hard enough to embed him in it to the shoulders, stone closing around him like a fist. He came out of the wall under his own power, Kai blazing, and the golden aura around him had intensified, brighter, steadier, more fully present. The hit had hurt. Real damage, real force, the specific ache of something that had actually reached through his defenses rather than being deflected or absorbed. He rolled his shoulders, felt the damage cataloging itself across his body's feedback systems, and did what he always did with pain from a genuine hit. He used it. The ki that flared outward from him in the moment after was different, not larger, but more completely expressed. The specific quality of a Saiyan who had been reminded by impact what was actually at stake. It pressed against Outworld's ambient energy and didn't blend with it or adjust to it, but simply occupied the same space and refused to yield. And for the first time since his arrival, the ambient wrongness he'd been managing as background sensation was pushed back, and the air around him for a 30-foot radius carried the clean, clear signature of his universe's ki as its primary frequency. Shao Kahn stopped. He had felt many things in 10,000 years, He had felt the power of elder gods and the divine authority of titans and the reality-warping force of titan-class entities and the specific terrible weight of Outworld's darkest magic at its fullest expression. He had not felt anything like what was currently standing 30 feet away from him, looking at him with clear, serious eyes, and not a single unit of cruelty in its expression. "You're strong," Goku said, and he meant it completely. "Genuinely, you've earned what you are." Shao Kahn stared at him. "But this tournament," Goku continued, "the way you run it, the killing, the forced service, the conquest, it's not strength, it's just weight. And weight." He paused, looking at the Emperor of Outworld with the specific directness of someone who had spent a lifetime fighting things that wanted to unmake the universe, and had never once hated any of them for it. Sulhur isn't the same thing as power. The sky above the coliseum changed. It happened the way significant cosmic events happened in this universe. Suddenly, completely, without gradual transition. The bruised Outworld sky fractured along lines of golden light. And through those fractures came the specific quality of presence that existed above realm law and tournament protocol and imperial authority, and every other framework this universe had constructed to manage the fact that some forces were simply beyond management. The elder gods were watching, and they had seen enough. Shao Kahn looked up at the fractured sky with the expression of a being who had defied elder god law before and survived it, and was now, for the first time in 10,000 years, genuinely uncertain whether survival was the available outcome. Goku looked up too. Then he looked back at Shao Kahn, and his ki shifted, not powering down, but settling into something quieter and more absolute, the specific quality of a decision made. He was done performing. The golden aura intensified and intensified again, and kept going, climbing through registers that made the stone beneath his feet begin to vibrate in harmonic response. And the air around him went white with the output of a being finally, fully, completely present. Super Saiyan Blue ignited in the fractured light of elder god attention. The coliseum went silent in a way it had never been silent before. Shao Kahn looked at what was standing across from him and, for the first time in 10 millennia, made the calculation that most beings made much earlier in their encounters with Son Goku. He calculated whether he could win, and the answer arrived before he finished the question. The elder gods did not intervene in the fight. They witnessed it. That distinction mattered in the framework of this universe's cosmic law. The elder gods were not actors, but arbiters. Their authority expressed not through direct action, but through observation that carried the weight of absolute record, every moment of what happened below them inscribed into the permanent ledger of realm history with a fidelity that no subsequent revision could alter. Shao Kahn had violated tournament law, or he had stepped outside the sacred compact and challenged a tournament participant to direct combat in front of the entire population of his own coliseum, and the divine attention of the beings whose law he was supposed to uphold. They were watching. And what they were watching was Shao Kahn, Emperor of Outworld, conqueror of 10 realms, holder of 9 consecutive Mortal Kombat victories. Losing. Not quickly, not easily. The Emperor fought with everything he had, and everything he had was genuinely extraordinary. A 10,000-year accumulation of combat experience and refined power, and the specific indomitable quality of a being whose entire identity was built around the refusal to yield. His hammer carved trenches in the Coliseum floor. His strikes landed with enough force to send shockwaves through the arena's foundations, thus the ancient stone groaning under the accumulated violence of an emperor, fighting as if the concept of defeat was a personal insult to his existence rather than a tactical outcome. Goku, in Super Saiyan Blue, met every strike. The blue aura was different from the golden one, quieter in the way that deeper things were quieter, the specific quality of God Ki fully expressed as something that didn't need to announce itself because its presence was self-evident. When it absorbed Shao Kahn's dimensional hammer force without disruption, the God Ki's fundamental nature incompatible with the destabilizing enchantments in a way that simply neutralized them on contact. And Goku moved through the Emperor's assault with the fluid precision of someone who had found the complete rhythm of his opponent and was now operating 3 exchanges ahead of the present moment. He wasn't going to kill Shao Kahn. That had never been a possibility he'd entertained, not for a single moment since the fight began. But he was going to do something that in this universe's framework was almost more significant. He was going to defeat him, completely and publicly and under Elder God observation, in a way that could not be reframed or denied or recontextualized by imperial narrative. He was going to make the loss real in front of everyone who needed to see it. The final exchange happened in the center of the arena. Shao Kahn committed to a full-power overhead strike. His hammer descending with every unit of force his 10,000-year-old body and enchanted weapon could produce. A blow that would have leveled a city block and that represented, in its totality, the Emperor of Outworld expressing himself without remainder or reservation. Goku caught it. Both hands around the hammer's haft, Ki blazing blue-white, 1 feet planted in the cracked stone floor. He caught it and held it, and the impact drove him down into the floor to his knees, the stone beneath him shattering in a perfect circle as the force distributed outward. And for 3 full seconds, the two of them existed in a locked equilibrium that made the air between them vibrate, and the coliseum walls shed stone in continuous sheets. Then Goku stood up. Against the full output of Shao Kahn's strike, he simply stood, and the hammer went back, and the Emperor of Outworld went with it, driven backward across his own arena floor by a single controlled push that carried no cruelty and no performance and no statement beyond the bare physical fact of the power differential between them. Shao Kahn hit the far wall. He didn't come back out, not because he couldn't. Goku read his ki carefully in the aftermath and confirmed that the Emperor was conscious, functional, and radiating the specific furious energy of a being who would absolutely continue if continuing were a viable option. He didn't come back out because something else happened in the moment after impact, something that arrived from above with the weight of absolute cosmic authority and made continuing categorically not a viable option. The Elder Gods spoke, not in language, not in sound, but in the specific way that beings of their nature communicated, a direct imposition of understanding on every conscious mind in the coliseum simultaneously, bypassing the mechanisms of hearing and translation and delivering their judgment as pure comprehension, immediate and complete and impossible to mishear or misinterpret. Shao Kahn, Emperor of Outworld. You have violated the sacred compact of Mortal Kombat. Direct combat outside tournament protocol. Use of tournament grounds for personal conquest. Systematic administration of lethal preference in direct contradiction of Elder God law. Your 9 victories are hereby annulled. Tournament administration is revoked. A new tournament will be convened under proper oversight. The silence that followed was the silence of a universe reorganizing around a new fact. Shao Kahn remained against the wall, his hammer on the ground beside him, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. His expression unreadable in the specific way of a being processing a loss that had no precedent in their experience. He was not broken. Goku read that clearly and filed it as something this universe would need to account for in the future. The Emperor of Outworld was diminished, but not ended. And diminished things with 10,000 years of accumulated power and the specific personality type that had built an empire through refusal to yield had a way of becoming future problems. But that was for this universe's defenders to manage. Goku's part in it was done. Across the arena, the coliseum population was processing what had happened with the specific compound reaction of a large group of people whose foundational assumptions had just been dismantled in public. Some Outworld warriors were watching Shao Kahn against the wall with expressions that were reorganizing around the strange new possibility of a world in which the Emperor's authority was not absolute. Others were watching Goku with the specific quality of attention that powerful beings received when their power had just been demonstrated at full expression in a context that left no room for doubt. Kitana stood at the arena's edge with her steel fans closed at her sides, and her expression carrying something that had been locked away under years of compelled service and careful survival. Not triumph, exactly. Because triumph implied that the cost had been worth it, and the cost had been too high for that word. But something adjacent to relief. The specific relief of someone who had been waiting for an impossibility and had watched it happen. She met Goku's eyes across the arena and nodded once. He nodded back. Liu Kang arrived through a convergence of fire that deposited him at the arena's center with the efficiency of a fire god who had learned not to waste entrances on drama. His expression was the specific compound of someone who had been managing 3 simultaneous theaters of operation and was now doing the rapid assessment of outcomes across all of them. He looked at Shao Kahn against the wall. He looked at the fractured sky where Elder Godlight was slowly withdrawing as the judgment settled into permanence. He looked at Goku. "The Netherrealm binding architecture is disrupted," he said. "The revenants are not freed. That requires separate work and time that I don't have in this moment. But Quanchi's direct control is severed. They have agency again, at least partially." He paused. "It's a beginning." "It's enough for now," Goku said. "The dimensional aperture to your universe of origin," Liu Kang continued. And his voice had changed, taken on the specific quality of someone arriving at the part of a conversation they'd been building toward. "I can open it. The temporal instability your presence creates resolves when you cross back. The probability branches collapse to a single line once the variable is removed from the equation." He held Goku's gaze steadily. "You should go home." Goku looked around the coliseum. The cracked stone, the fractured walls, the sky where Elder Godlight was fading back into Outworld's bruised atmospheric normal, and the thousands of beings who had watched something happen today that none of them had a framework for yet. But that had changed something fundamental in the architecture of what they believed was possible. He thought about Gohan, about Chi-Chi, about Vegeta, who was probably furious, and Bulma, who was probably more furious, and the specific, unremarkable blue of Earth's sky that he had never consciously appreciated until this moment. "Yeah," he said. "I should." Raiden approached from the arena's edge, his expression carrying the compound weight of someone at the end of a crisis that had demanded everything and was now settling into its aftermath. He stopped before Goku and looked at him with those ancient, tired, still-standing eyes. "You came here by accident," the Thunder God said. "You had no obligation to any of this." "Didn't feel that way once I was here," Goku said simply. Raiden was quiet for a moment. Then, "Thank you." Goku shook his head. "I didn't do it for Earthrealm," he said. It wasn't unkind. It was the same honest directness he gave everything. "I did it because it needed doing. There's a difference." Raiden absorbed this with the expression of someone receiving a lesson they hadn't expected from a source they hadn't anticipated. "Yes," he said finally. "There is." Liu Kang stepped forward and raised his hands. The fire god aspect fully present now. The contained heat beneath his skin becoming external. his palms generating a specific controlled frequency of dimensional energy that found the resonance of Goku's key signature, and began constructing the aperture around it, building the crossing from the inside out. The air in front of Goku began to shimmer, not the dark shimmer of the Netherrealm threshold, but something cleaner and brighter. The specific quality of a dimensional boundary opening toward a universe that ran on different rules and different energies, and a sky that was exactly the right shade of blue. Goku could feel it. His universe, on the other side of the light. The specific familiar frequency of a reality he'd been born into. The resonance of Kikr as the fundamental energy of everything. The distant sense of people he knew existing in their proper places and doing their proper things and being entirely unaware that he'd been gone. He could feel Vegeta too. Angry and close and looking for him with the specific furious energy of someone who had watched his sparring partner disappear through a dimensional tear and was not taking it well. Goku smiled. He turned once more toward the arena. Shao Kahn still against the wall. Kitana at the edge, composed and watchful, on Sindel somewhere he couldn't immediately locate, processing something private. Shang Tsung absent from the Imperial box, gone in the aftermath of the Elder God's judgment to wherever beings like him went when the immediate situation stopped serving their interests. Quanchi behind his threshold, recalculating. All of it unresolved in the specific way that real things were unresolved. Not cleanly concluded, but shifted. The landscape changed enough that new possibilities existed that hadn't existed before. The seeds of something different planted in ground that had only ever grown one thing. He stepped toward the aperture. The aperture closed behind him like a held breath finally released. In the Outworld coliseum, the light faded gradually, not all at once but in layers. The dimensional energy dissipating from the outside in. The last trace of it, a faint warmth in the air where Goku had been standing that lasted perhaps 30 seconds before Outworld's ambient energy reclaimed the space entirely. The stone floor bore the evidence of everything that had happened. Craters and fracture lines, and the specific topography of a fight that had exceeded every scale the arena had been built to contain. But the fighter himself was gone. Returned to whatever impossible universe had produced him, leaving behind only consequences. Raiden stood in the empty arena for a long time. He thought about what Goku had said. I didn't do it for Earthrealm. I did it because it needed doing. In 10,000 years of protecting a realm, of calculating costs and weighing obligations and measuring every action against the specific ledger of what Earthrealm needed, he wasn't sure he had ever heard that particular formulation. He had heard duty. He had heard honor. He had heard the specific justifications that warriors constructed around their choices to make those choices bearable across the long term. While he had not heard someone describe doing the right thing as simply the thing that needed doing, with no further architecture required. He thought he might remember that for a very long time. Kitana moved through the aftermath with the focused efficiency of someone who understood that the window between an emperor's defeat and his recovery was exactly the width of the actions you could take in it. There was work to do. Real work. None the kind that didn't resolve in a single confrontation, but required the patient reconstruction of something that had been broken for so long the people had stopped remembering what it looked like intact. Outworld's political landscape had shifted. The tournament's administration had been revoked. Shao Kahn was diminished but present, and diminished emperors with 10 millennia of accumulated will were the specific kind of problem that required sustained attention. She was ready to give it. Liu Kang watched the aperture's last light fade and felt the temporal architecture of this universe settle around the change. The probability branches that Goku's presence had generated collapsing back into a single line, cleaner now. The instabilities resolving into a new equilibrium that was different from the old one, in ways that would take decades to fully manifest. He had rebuilt timelines before. He understood that the most significant changes were never the dramatic ones. The fights, the confrontations, the moments that the Coliseum population would recount for generations. The most significant changes were the quiet ones, the seeds. A warrior who refused to kill in a universe built entirely around killing had spent 3 days demonstrating a different possibility to thousands of people who had never seen it enacted at that level of power. That was the change that mattered. In the Netherrealm, behind his threshold, Quanchi was already recalculating if the binding architecture's disruption was a setback, not a defeat. He had survived worse and rebuilt from less, and the specific patient quality of his intelligence did not require momentum to function. He would find another approach. He always did. Shang Tsung was simply gone, which was, in its way, the most concerning outcome of all. And Shao Kahn, the Emperor of Outworld, conqueror of 10 realms, are the most formidable being this universe had produced in 10,000 years of continuous conflict. Sat against the wall of his own coliseum in the aftermath of a judgment that had stripped his tournament authority and annulled his victories, and looked at the place where the aperture had been, and thought about a warrior in an orange gi who had caught his hammer with both hands and stood up under its full force, and then, instead of finishing it, had simply pushed him back. Not with contempt, not with cruelty, with the specific, infuriating, incomprehensible mercy of a being who didn't consider him worth hating. Shao Kahn had been defeated before, rarely at enormous cost to whoever managed it, and always with consequences. But he had never been defeated by someone who clearly could have ended him and had chosen, with full awareness and zero hesitation, not to. He didn't have a framework for that. His entire existence, every value he had ever constructed, ran on the premise that power existed to be used at its limit. The stranger had power at a limit Shao Kahn couldn't match, and he had chosen not to use it. The Emperor of Outworld sat in the ruins of his arena and for the first time in 10,000 years thought about why. Somewhere between universes, in the non-space of dimensional transit, Goku was falling home. The crossing was instantaneous in one sense and eternal in another. The subjective experience of dimensional travel having its own relationship with time that had nothing to do with distance. He felt his universe approaching, the familiar frequency of his own reality's sky rising around him like warmth after cold. And with it came the accumulated weight of everything he was returning to. The people, the places, the endless horizon of challenges that a universe full of beings willing to push their limits always seemed to generate. He thought about the Mortal Kombat universe in the specific way he thought about every place he'd been and every person he'd fought. Not with nostalgia exactly, because nostalgia required a kind of loss he didn't feel, but with the particular warmth of genuine experience. Raiden's exhausted authority, Kitana's patient fury, Liu Kang's direct, uncomplicated competence, Shao Kahn's genuine power, and the specific tragedy of a strength that had never learned what it was actually for. Sindel's unreadable recalibration, Shang Tsung's ancient hunger, and the cold intelligence behind it. Real people, a real universe. Different rules, different energies, different definitions of what power meant and what it was worth. He hoped Kitana got what she was working toward. He hoped the revenants got their will back. He hoped, in the specific, uncomplicated way he hoped things, that Shao Kahn eventually figured out the thing he'd been sitting in the rubble thinking about. The aperture released him into his universe's sky above the hyperbolic time chamber's exterior plateau, the specific blue of his Earth arriving around him like a held note finally resolved. And below him, Vegeta was standing, with his arms crossed, and his expression carrying approximately 3 days' worth of compressed fury that had been waiting for a target. "Where?" Vegeta said, and in the tone of someone who had been practicing this opening. "Have you been?" Goku dropped out of the sky and landed in front of him and grinned. The full, uncomplicated, completely infuriating grin that Vegeta had spent decades failing to develop an adequate response to. "You're not going to believe this," Goku said. Vegeta's eye twitched. Above them, the sky was exactly the right shade of blue. Unremarkable, perfect. The specific color of a universe that ran on ki and transformation and the endless, renewable optimism of a Saiyan who had just spent 3 days in a place built entirely on darkness and had come home with his ki clean and his principles intact and the absolute certainty that somewhere in the infinite machinery of the multiverse, things were going to be a little different than they'd been before he arrived. Not fixed, not resolved, not the clean conclusion that simpler stories promised. Just different, just better in the specific small ways that mattered. It was enough.